The orc woman named Greta Othwin had learned early in life that people looked through her the way sunlight passes through clean water, barely noticing she was there at all. She stood at the edge of the trading fair now, watching merchants call out to customers with practiced enthusiasm, and told herself it did not matter that the baker she had bought bread from 3 times that morning would look at her blankly if she returned for a 4th loaf. It did not matter that the woman selling pottery had haggled prices with her yesterday, and today acted as though they had never met. Greta had grown accustomed to being a face that failed to stick in anyone's mind, a person who needed to reintroduce herself every single time, and she had built her life around that strange, inexplicable truth. The autumn fair spread across the meadow outside Millbrook, a frontier town where 3 territories met and traders came to sell their wares twice yearly. Greta had traveled 2 days from her family's farm to trade the honey her bees produced, and the herbs she dried with careful attention to color and fragrance. She was good at what she did, known for quality even if her face remained a mystery, and over the years she had learned to announce herself clearly, to say her name multiple times in every transaction, to accept that tomorrow the same merchant would need to hear it all again. She moved through the crowds with her basket, heading toward the leather goods section where she hoped to find oil for her work boots and perhaps a new belt. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the October air, and around her the fair hummed with life and commerce and the particular energy of people who had waited months for this gathering. "Greta Othwin," a voice called out, clear and warm and impossibly specific. She stopped walking. No one called her name like that, as though they were certain of it, as though it belonged to someone they actually knew. She turned slowly, searching for the source, and found herself looking at a man standing behind a table laden with leather goods of every description. He was smiling at her, and the smile reached his eyes in a way that suggested genuine pleasure at seeing her. "I was hoping you would come back this year," he said. Greta stared at him. He was perhaps 30, with brown hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of honey in sunlight. He wore a leather apron over a linen shirt, and his hands rested on the table between them, scarred and strong in the way of someone who worked with tools every day. She did not remember him. She should remember him if he remembered her, but her mind offered nothing, no recollection of his face or voice. "I am sorry," she said carefully, approaching the table. "Have we met last autumn?" he said, and his smile did not falter at her question. "You bought a bottle of leather oil and a packet of dark green dye for a saddle you were repairing. You told me your father had bet you could not match the original color, and you were determined to prove him wrong." The memory surfaced slowly, uncertain. She had bought green dye last year. She had made that bet with her father, but she could not picture this man, could not recall his face among the dozens of merchants she had spoken to that week. "You do remember," she said, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. "How do you remember that?" "You also said you took your tea with honey and no milk, because you claimed the bees worked hard enough that you owed them loyalty." He gestured to a small camp stove at the side of his booth where a kettle steamed gently. "I have honey here, if you would like a cup." Greta felt something shift in her chest, a sensation she could not name. People did not remember her tea preferences. People did not remember her jokes. People barely remembered meeting her at all. "Who else are you thinking of?" she asked. "I think perhaps you have confused me with someone else." The man's expression shifted, becoming more serious, though not unkind. "I have not confused you with anyone. You are Greta Othwin. You have a small scar on your left hand shaped like a crescent moon. You tie your hair back with a green ribbon most days. Last year you wore a brown dress with copper buttons, And this year you are wearing a gray one with those same buttons, which makes me think you like them particularly well." She looked down at her dress. The copper buttons had indeed come from the brown dress, which had worn through at the elbows. She had salvaged them because they were pretty and well made, and she had not wanted to waste them. No one had ever noticed them before. No one had ever noticed her enough to track such details. "I do not understand," she said. "My name is Lysander Lyle," the man said. "I make leather goods, as you can see. I remember you because I have thought about you often since we met." Heat rose in her face. Greta was not accustomed to blushing, was not accustomed to being the object of anyone's particular attention. She looked at Lysander Lyle and tried to understand what was happening, why he would lie about something like this, what he hoped to gain. "That does not make sense," she said. "Why not?" "Because people do not remember me. I am not the sort of person anyone thinks about after I leave. I have accepted this. It is simply how things are." Lysander tilted his head, studying her with an expression that was both curious and concerned. "You believe you are forgettable." "I do not believe it. I know it. I have tested it my whole life. I could have a conversation with someone, walk away for 10 minutes, and return to find they have no memory of speaking to me at all. Merchants I have bought from for years look at me like a stranger every time. It is not unkindness. It is not cruelty. It is simply the truth of who I am." He was quiet for a moment, and she saw something move across his face, some thought or realization she could not interpret. Then he reached beneath his table and pulled out a small leather notebook, worn smooth at the edges from handling. "I wrote about you," he said, opening it carefully. "I write about everyone I meet, everyone I want to remember. It helps me keep track." Greta leaned forward despite herself, curiosity overcoming caution. The notebook was filled with neat, small handwriting, and she could see names and details scattered across the pages. He flipped through until he found what he was looking for, then turned it so she could read. "Greta Othwin," the entry began. "Orc woman, approximately 24 years old, green skin, small tusks, pointed ears, kind eyes, bought leather oil and green dye, repairing father's saddle. Bet on color match, takes tea with honey, no milk, jokes about be loyalty, copper buttons on brown dress, crescent scar on left hand, came alone, smiled when she thought no one was watching, pretty smile, want to see it again." She read the words twice, then a third time. Her throat felt tight. No one had ever written about her before. No one had ever thought her smile worth noting or her eyes worth describing. The detail was overwhelming, the care evident in every line. "Why?" she asked, and hated how her voice shook on the word. "Because I wanted to remember you," Lysander said simply. "Because from the moment you walked up to my table last year, I found myself wanting to know everything about you. Because when you left, I realized I did not want to forget a single detail. So I wrote it down." "But why do you write everything down?" Greta pressed. "This notebook, all these people, this is not normal. This is not what most people do." His expression shifted again, and this time she saw pain flicker across his features before he controlled it. He closed the notebook carefully and set it on the table between them. 3 years ago I was in a wagon accident," he said. "A wheel broke on a mountain pass and the whole thing went over. I survived, but I hit my head badly. When I woke up, I had lost a year of my memories, just gone as though they had never existed. And in that year my younger sister had visited me for a month. We spent time together. We talked. We grew closer. And now I cannot remember her face. I cannot remember what we said to each other. I cannot remember anything about that time, and she died of fever 8 months after the accident, so I can never get those memories back." Greta felt her heart contract. She understood loss, understood the ache of wanting something you could never have. but to lose memories of someone you loved, to have them simply erased as though they had never been, that was a cruelty she could barely comprehend. "I am sorry," she said, and meant it deeply. "After she died, I started writing everything down," Lysander continued. "Every person I meet, every conversation that matters, every detail I want to keep, because I am terrified it will happen again. I am terrified I will wake up one day and find that more has been stolen from me. So I write and I remember and I hold on to everything I can." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Greta saw in his face a vulnerability that matched her own. They were both wounded in their ways, both carrying fears that shaped how they moved through the world. "You wrote that you wanted to see me again," she said quietly. "I did. I have thought about you for a year, Greta Othwin. I have wondered if you would return. I have hoped that if you did, I would find the courage to tell you that I remembered you, that you mattered enough to write down, that you were not forgettable to me." She did not know what to say. Her whole life, she had been invisible, someone who slipped through the cracks of memory like water through cupped hands. And here was a man who wrote her down, who kept her in ink and leather, who had spent a year thinking about her smile. "I still think you might be confused," she said, but her protest was weaker now, more hope than certainty. "Then let me prove it to you," Lysander said. "Stay here for a while, talk to me. Tomorrow, when you come back, I will still remember. Every day of this fair I will remember. And maybe, if you allow it, I will write new things about you, and I will remember those too." Greta looked at the notebook, at his face, at the tea kettle steaming in the autumn sunlight. She thought about going back to her farm, to her quiet life where no one knew her name, and she thought about staying here, about testing this impossible thing that he offered. "I would like that tea," she said finally, "with honey, the way you remembered." Lysander's smile was bright enough to warm her from the inside out. He poured the tea carefully, added honey from a small jar, and handed her the cup. She took it, their fingers brushing briefly, and she felt the touch resonate through her like a bell being struck. "Tell me something new," he said. "Something I can write down tonight." She sipped her tea and thought. "I have 12 hives now instead of 8. I am trying to breed a strain that will be hardier through the winter. I lost 2 hives last year to the cold, and it made me determined to do better." 12 hives, he repeated, and she could see him committing it to memory. "Are you succeeding?" "With the breeding, I think so. The bees from my strongest hive seem to be passing on their resilience. But it takes time. Bees do not change their nature quickly." "Neither do people," Lysander said. "Though sometimes I think we should." They talked for an hour, maybe more. Greta told him about her farm, about the herbs she grew, and the way the mountains looked in the morning light. Lysander told her about his work, about the satisfaction of making something useful and beautiful, about the customers who returned year after year, because they trusted his craftsmanship. He did not mention his sister again, but Greta could feel the weight of that loss in the spaces between his words. When she finally left his booth, promising to return the next day, she felt different. Lighter, perhaps, or maybe heavier, but changed in some fundamental way. She walked through the fair, sold her honey and herbs, bought the things she needed, and all the while she turned over Lysander's words in her mind. He remembered her. He had written her down. He thought her worth keeping. That night, in the small tent she had pitched at the edge of the fairgrounds, Greta lay awake and stared at the canvas above her. She tried to remember Lysander's face from last year and could not. She tried to remember if she had noticed him, if she had felt any spark of connection, and found nothing. It disturbed her, this asymmetry, this sense that he had been carrying her in his thoughts while she had carried nothing of him at all. But perhaps that was what it meant to be forgettable. Perhaps she simply did not stick in her own memory either, could not hold on to the people she met, because some part of her believed they would not hold on to her. She fell asleep thinking about notebooks and honey, and the way Lysander had looked at her, as though she were someone worth seeing. The next morning she returned to his booth before she did anything else. He looked up when she approached, and his face brightened immediately. "Greta," he said, and the way he said her name, certain and warm, made her chest ache. "Good morning." "You remember," she said. "Of course I remember. I told you I would." She set down the basket she was carrying. "I brought you something." Inside was a small jar of honey, darker and richer than the usual variety, and a bundle of dried lavender tied with string. Lysander picked up the jar, holding it up to the light so the amber liquid glowed. "From the strong hive?" he asked. "Yes, that is their honey. It has a different flavor, something deeper. I thought you might like it." "I will treasure it," he said, and she believed him. He set the jar carefully on his table in a place of honor among his tools and wares. "Will you stay for breakfast? I have bread and cheese, nothing fancy but enough to share." She stayed. They ate together, sitting on the stools behind his booth, and talked about simple things. She learned that he had a workshop an hour's ride south of Millbrook, that he lived alone, that he had been apprenticed to a master leatherworker as a boy, and inherited the business when the old man retired. He learned that she had 2 older brothers who ran the farm alongside her father, that her mother had died when she was young, that she preferred the company of bees to the company of most people. "People forget bees," she said, "but bees remember. They remember flowers, remember threats, remember their hive mates. There is a reliability to them." "I understand that," Lysander said, "the need for reliability." "Because of your memories," Greta said. "Yes, I write down the important things, but I still worry. What if I forget to write something? What if I lose the notebook? What if the ink fades or the pages tear? I have backup notebooks at home, copies of the most important entries, but even that does not feel like enough sometimes." Greta thought about this, about living with that kind of fear. "Your sister," she said carefully. "What was her name?" "Lily. Lily Lyle. She was 6 years younger than me. I remember what she looked like as a child, but not at the end. Not when she was grown. That year I lost, it contained the last time I saw her before she died. So I have no final image, no proper goodbye in my mind. That is a terrible thing to lose. It is. And I am angry about it, even though anger does nothing. I am angry at the wagon, at the mountain, at my own fragile skull. Mostly I am angry that I cannot remember her face when I try. Other people can describe her to me, can tell me she had dark hair and blue eyes and a stubborn chin, but that does not give me the picture. It does not give me her." Greta reached out slowly and put her hand over his. His skin was warm, his fingers calloused from his work. He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. "I think you are brave," she said, "to keep trying to remember, to write everything down even though you are afraid. That is not a small thing." "Sometimes it feels obsessive," Lysander admitted. "Sometimes I worry I am holding on too tightly, trying to control something I cannot control. But you are doing it anyway. That is what makes it brave." He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers, and they sat like that for a while, connected in the warm morning light. Around them the fair began to wake up properly, merchants calling out greetings, customers arriving in search of goods, the whole bustling energy of commerce resuming. "Come back tonight," Lysander said. "After the fair closes, I want to show you something." "What is it?" "A surprise." "A good one, I promise." Greta agreed, curious despite herself. She spent the day selling her goods, replenishing her supplies, and watching Lysander from a distance whenever she could. She saw how he interacted with his customers, how he treated each person with attention and care. She saw him pull out his notebook several times, writing quick entries when he had a free moment. Once he caught her watching, and he smiled at her across the crowded fairground, a smile just for her, and she felt that same resonance in her chest, that sense of being seen. When evening came and the merchants began packing up their wares, Greta returned to Lysander's booth. He had covered his table with canvas and secured his more valuable items in locked chests. He straightened when he saw her, that same pleased expression crossing his face. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready for what? You will see." He led her away from the fairground, following a path that wound through the meadow and into the trees beyond. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air smelled of wood smoke and autumn leaves. Greta followed him, trusting in a way she was not accustomed to trusting, and tried not to think too hard about what that meant. They emerged from the trees onto a small hilltop that overlooked the entire valley. Below them, the fair spread out like a patchwork quilt, all torches and campfires and evening activity. The mountains rose in the distance, purple against the darkening sky, and the first stars were beginning to appear overhead. "I come here every evening during the fair," Lysander said. "It helps me think, it helps me process the day." "It is beautiful," Greta said. "It is. But I wanted to show you because I wanted to tell you something, and I wanted to tell you somewhere that felt honest, somewhere away from the crowds." She turned to look at him. His face was serious now, the playfulness of earlier replaced by something more intense, more vulnerable. "I have been thinking about you for a year, Greta," he said. "I told you that already. But what I did not say is that I think I have been falling in love with you for that year, even though we only met once. I know that sounds foolish. I know you probably think I am inventing feelings based on a single conversation. But I wrote you down and I read what I wrote, and every time I did I found myself wishing I could talk to you again, wishing I could learn more, wishing you were here." Greta's heart was beating too fast. "You do not know me well enough to love me." "Maybe not," Lysander agreed. "But I know enough to want to. I know enough to believe that I could. And I wanted to tell you because I do not want to hide it. I do not want to pretend I am just a friendly merchant who happens to have a good memory. I want you to know that when I look at you, I see someone extraordinary. Someone I want to keep seeing." She did not know what to say. No one had ever said such things to her. No one had ever looked at her the way Lysander was looking at her now, as though she held something precious that he desperately wanted. "I am not extraordinary," she said. "I am ordinary in every way. I am forgettable. That is the whole problem. You are not forgettable to me. But you write everything down. How do I know I am different from anyone else in that notebook? How do I know I am not just another entry, another detail you are afraid to lose?" Lysander took a breath. "Because I do not need to write you down anymore. I have not opened my notebook to check your details since the first day you arrived. I remember on my own now. I remember because you matter enough that my mind will not let go." She searched his face, looking for deception, looking for any sign that he was playing some elaborate game. She found only sincerity, only that same vulnerability she had seen when he talked about his sister. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I am afraid that if I believe you, if I let myself think I could be someone you love, I will wake up one day and you will look at me like a stranger, like everyone else does." "I am afraid too," Lysander said. "I am afraid I will forget you the way I forgot Lily. I am afraid my mind will betray me again. But I think maybe being afraid together is better than being afraid alone." Greta thought about her bees, about the way they worked together, supported each other, survived as a collective. She thought about living her whole life as someone no one remembered, and she thought about this man who had spent a year thinking of her. "I do not know how to do this," she said. "I do not know how to be someone who is remembered." "Then we will figure it out together," Lysander said. "If you want to, if you are willing to try." She looked out at the valley, at the fair glowing in the twilight, and made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "I am willing," she said. Lysander reached for her hand again, and this time when their fingers intertwined, it felt like a promise, like the beginning of something that might actually last. They stood on the hilltop as night fell properly, watching the stars emerge one by one, and Greta allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that she might be someone worth remembering after all. The next morning, Greta woke with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She had dreamed of Lysander forgetting her, of returning to his booth to find him looking at her with polite confusion. And the dream had felt so real that she had to remind herself it was not true, that he had promised to remember, that he had written her down. She dressed quickly and walked to his booth, her heart pounding harder with each step. When she arrived, he was arranging his goods for the day, and he looked up at the sound of her footsteps. "Greta," he said immediately, warmly, and the knot in her stomach loosened. "I was hoping you would come early. I saved you some breakfast." She sat with him again, eating bread and apples, and tried to relax into the simple fact of his continued recognition. He asked her about her plans for the day, told her about a custom order he was working on, and treated her with the easy familiarity of someone who knew her, who had not forgotten overnight. "You were worried," he said after a while. "I can see it on your face." "I was worried you would not remember me this morning," Greta admitted. "I know you said you would, I know you promised, but I am not used to being remembered." Lysander set down the apple he was eating. "How long has this been happening to you, this forgettability?" "My whole life. Since I was a child. My own family remembers me, but almost no one else does. I have learned to work with it. I introduce myself constantly. I do not take it personally when merchants act like they have never seen me before. But it has made me careful. It has made me assume I will always be alone." "That sounds exhausting." "It is, but it is also what I know." Lysander was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Have you ever tried to understand why it happens? Whether there is a reason?" I have asked. I have wondered. Some people think it might be a curse, or some strange magical effect, but no one has been able to tell me for certain. My father thinks I am imagining it, that I simply do not make strong impressions. My brothers think I am too quiet, that people forget me because I do not assert myself enough. But I know it is more than that. I know there is something about me that does not stick in people's minds. "You stick in mine," Lysander said firmly. "Curse or not, magic or not, you are real to me. You are here and I see you and I will keep seeing you." His certainty was almost overwhelming. Greta wanted to believe him completely, wanted to let go of the fear that had defined her life, but letting go was harder than she had imagined. "I am trying," she said. "I am trying to believe you. That is all I ask." They spent the day together between his customer transactions. Greta found herself helping him occasionally, fetching tools or holding pieces of leather while he cut them. The work was soothing, the rhythm of it calming, and she liked watching his hands move with practiced skill. He talked while he worked, telling her stories about difficult customers and successful projects, and she found herself laughing more than she had in months. In the afternoon, an older woman approached the booth, her face lighting up when she saw Lysander. "Lysander Lyle," she said. "I was hoping to find you here." "Meredith," Lysander said, standing to greet her properly. "It is good to see you. How is your grandson, growing like a weed and twice as troublesome?" the woman said fondly. "I need a new saddle for his pony. The old one is falling apart." They discussed specifications and prices, and Greta watched as Lysander pulled out his notebook and made notes about the order. When Meredith left, promising to return the next day with measurements, Lysander caught Greta's eye. "I have known Meredith for 5 years," he said. But I still write down details about her family, about her orders, about the things she mentions in passing. It helps me give better service, yes, but it also helps me feel connected. It helps me feel like I am building something lasting. You remember more than most people would, even with a notebook, Greta observed. You asked about her grandson before she mentioned him. I read through my entries every night, Lysander admitted. I review the people I met, the conversations I had. It keeps everything fresh. It keeps me from losing things. You must have hundreds of entries by now. Thousands, probably. I have been doing this for 3 years. He hesitated, then said, "Would you like to see them? The notebooks, I mean, all of them." Greta nodded, curious and strangely honored. After the fair closed that evening, Lysander brought her to his camp, a well-organized tent with a bedroll and several chests. He opened one chest and pulled out a stack of notebooks, perhaps a dozen in all, each one similar to the one he carried daily. "This is everything," he said. 3 years of memories, written down and kept safe. Greta picked up one of the older notebooks and opened it carefully. The handwriting was the same, neat and small, but the tone was different, more frantic, more desperate. She read entries about customers, about friends, about daily activities, and she could feel Lysander's fear bleeding through the words, his terror of losing more of himself. "You were so afraid," she said softly. "I still am sometimes, but it is better now. The fear is not as sharp." She flipped through more pages, seeing the evolution of his entries, the way they became less panicked and more purposeful over time. Then she found a section labeled "Lily Reconstructed Memories," and her breath caught. "You have been trying to rebuild what you lost," she said. "Yes. I have talked to everyone who knew her during that year. My cousins, her friends, the neighbors who saw us together. I have written down everything they told me, every story they shared. It is not the same as remembering myself, but it is something. It is better than nothing." Greta read through the entries about Lily. They painted a picture of a young woman who was bright and stubborn and deeply loved, who had visited her brother's workshop and learned to tool leather, who had argued with him about politics and laughed at his terrible jokes. The details were rich and specific, clearly provided by people who had cared about her, but there was a distance to them, a second-hand quality that must have hurt Lysander every time he read them. "She sounds wonderful," Greta said. "She was. I remember that much. I remember loving her, even if I cannot remember her face." An idea formed in Greta's mind, fragile but insistent. What if we tried to find someone who could help you remember, not just reconstruct from stories, but actually recover the lost memories? Lysander looked at her, surprised. "I have tried. I have talked to healers, to hedge witches, to anyone who might know something about head injuries and memory loss. No one has been able to help. But have you tried to gather everyone who knew her in that year, all together in one place? Sometimes memories come back when you are in the right environment, surrounded by the right people." He was quiet, considering this. "I have not tried that," he admitted. "Most of them are scattered now. Lily's friends married and moved away. My cousins live in different towns. It would take time to bring them together. But it might work," Greta pressed. "And if it did, if you could remember her properly, would it be worth the effort?" "Yes," Lysander said immediately. "Yes, it would be worth anything." "Then let me help you," Greta said. "Let me help you organize it, reach out to people, plan it. You have given me something I never thought I could have, someone who remembers me. Let me give you something back." Lysander reached out and cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "You do not owe me anything, Greta. I know, but I want to do this. I want to help you heal this wound the way you are helping me heal mine." He kissed her then, soft and careful, and Greta felt the world narrow to just the two of them, just this moment of connection and promise. When they pulled apart, she saw tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for seeing this, for understanding." "We will figure it out together," Greta said, echoing his words from the hilltop. "We will bring them together and we will help you remember." The fair lasted 2 more days, and Greta spent every spare moment with Lysander, planning their project. They made lists of everyone who had known Lily during the lost year, tracking down addresses and writing letters. Lysander knew where most of them were, had kept loose contact over the years, and the task of organizing a gathering felt suddenly possible rather than impossible. On the last day of the fair, as merchants began packing up their goods for the journey home, Lysander asked Greta a question she had been half expecting, half dreading. "Will you come visit me?" he said. "At my workshop. I know your farm is 2 days away, but I want to keep seeing you. I want this to continue." "I want that too," Greta said, "but I am still afraid. What if the forgettability follows me? What if I visit and then return home, and when I come back you have forgotten me?" "Then we will test it," Lysander said. "You will visit, stay a few days, and then go home. And I will write you letters while you are gone, letters that prove I remember. And when you come back, I will still know your face, still know your name, still know everything about you that matters." It was a reasonable plan, a way to build trust slowly. Greta agreed, and they set a date for her to visit in 2 weeks, enough time for her to return home, catch up on her farm work, and prepare for a longer absence. When she finally left the fair, riding her sturdy mare back toward the mountains, Greta carried with her a bundle of letters Lysander had written in advance, one for each day until they would see each other again. She also carried the knowledge that someone in the world thought about her, remembered her, wanted her around. It was a strange and precious feeling, and she held it close as she traveled. At home, her father and brothers greeted her with their usual distracted affection. They remembered her, of course, but in the vague way family members remember each other when they see each other every day. She told them about meeting Lysander, about his invitation to visit, and they approved in the absent way they approved of most things she did, trusting her to manage her own life. Over the next 2 weeks, Greta read Lysander's letters each evening. They were full of small details about his days, questions about hers, and reassurances that he was thinking of her. He wrote about the projects he was working on, the customers he was serving, and the progress he was making on contacting people for the gathering they had planned. Each letter ended with some small observation about her, some detail he remembered, and Greta found herself rereading those sections over and over, trying to internalize the idea that she was memorable to someone. She also wrote back, sending letters of her own through the merchant routes that connected their regions. She told him about her bees, about the herbs she was harvesting, about the way the autumn light fell across the mountains in the evening. She tried to write the way she spoke, honest and unguarded, and hoped he could feel her presence in the words. When the 2 weeks ended, Greta packed a bag and rode south toward Lysander's workshop. The journey took her through familiar territory, and then into lands she knew less well, rolling hills and small farms, and eventually a valley where a river ran clear and cold. Lysander had given her detailed directions, and she found his workshop easily, a stone building with a thatched roof and smoke rising from the chimney. He came out when he heard her horse, and his face split into a wide smile when he saw her. "Greta Othwin," he called. "You came. I said I would." "I know, but I am still glad." He helped her down from her mare and led the horse to a small stable behind the workshop. Inside, the building smelled of leather and wood smoke and the particular scent of tanning solutions. There was a workspace with tools hanging neatly on the walls, a small living area with a bed and a table, and shelves lined with finished goods and raw materials. It was tidy and organized, the space of someone who valued order and control. "Welcome," Lysander said. "I know it is not much, but it is home." "It is perfect," Greta said, and meant it. They fell into an easy routine over the next few days. Greta helped with his work, learning the basics of leathercraft and finding she had a decent eye for detail. Lysander cooked meals for them, simple but well made, and they ate together while talking about everything and nothing. In the evenings they sat by the fire and planned the gathering, reviewing the responses they had received from Lily's old friends and Lysander's family members. Most people had agreed to come. They would gather in a month's time, meeting at the home of Lysander's cousin who lived halfway between the various locations. It would be the first time many of them had been together since Lily's funeral, and Lysander admitted he was nervous about it. "What if it does not work?" he said one night. "What if I am surrounded by all these people, all these memories, and nothing comes back?" "Then you will still have their stories," Greta said. "You will still have the connection, and you will know you tried." "I suppose you are right." "I am right," she said firmly, "and I will be there with you. You will not be alone." He looked at her with such gratitude that it made her chest ache. "I do not know what I did to deserve you walking into my life." "You remembered me," Greta said simply. "That was enough." On her last night before returning home, Lysander gave her a gift. It was a leather journal, beautifully tooled with a pattern of bees and flowers, the cover smooth and rich with oil. "I made this for you," he said. "I thought perhaps you might want to write down your own memories, your own observations, not because you will forget, but because some things are worth keeping." Greta ran her fingers over the cover, marveling at the craftsmanship. The bees looked almost alive, their wings detailed and delicate. "This is beautiful. You mentioned once that bees remember. I thought it was fitting." She opened the journal to find the first page inscribed with Lysander's handwriting. "For Greta Othwin, who is unforgettable, may you see yourself the way I see you." Tears pricked at her eyes. She set the journal down carefully and wrapped her arms around him, holding tight. He held her back, and they stood like that for a long time, two people learning to trust, learning to hope. The next morning Greta rode home, the journal tucked safely in her pack. She spent the weeks before the gathering working her farm and writing in the journal, documenting her days the way Lysander documented his. She wrote about her bees, about the changing weather, about her thoughts and fears and the strange new happiness growing in her chest. She wrote about Lysander, about the way he looked at her, about the sound of his laugh. And she wrote about herself, trying to see the person he saw, trying to believe she was worth the attention he gave her. When the time came for the gathering, Greta and Lysander traveled together to his cousin's home, a comfortable farmhouse surrounded by fields of late-season wheat. People arrived throughout the day, relatives and friends Greta had only heard about in stories. They greeted Lysander with warmth, and they looked at Greta with curiosity, clearly wondering who she was and why she was there. Lysander introduced her as someone important to him, and Greta saw the calculation in some of their eyes, the assessment of what her presence meant. But most of them were kind, welcoming her as they would welcome anyone Lysander cared about. The gathering proper began that evening, everyone crowded into the farmhouse's main room. Lysander had asked them all to come prepared to share memories of Lily, specifically from that lost year, and they went around the room taking turns. A cousin talked about Lily learning to tool leather in Lysander's workshop, her determination to master a pattern she found challenging. A friend described a conversation about travel, about places Lily wanted to see someday. A neighbor recalled her helping with a difficult foaling, her calm presence soothing a panicked mare. Story after story, memory after memory, they painted a picture of Lily during those lost months. Lysander listened intently, his notebook open on his lap, writing down details as people spoke. Greta sat beside him, her hand resting on his knee in silent support, and watched his face for any sign of recognition, any indication that the memories were coming back. At first, there was nothing. He wrote and listened and thanked people for sharing, but his expression remained frustrated, distant. Then one of Lily's closest friends, a woman named Clara, shared a story about an argument they had about something trivial, a disagreement over which route to take on a walk that had escalated into laughter. "She threw a pine cone at me," Clara said, smiling at the memory. "Hit me square in the shoulder. And then she laughed so hard she could barely breathe, and I could not stay mad at her because her laugh was ridiculous, this snorting, wheezing thing that made everyone around her start laughing too." Lysander went very still. Greta felt his leg tense beneath her hand, and she looked at his face to find his eyes distant, focused on something internal. "I remember that laugh," he said slowly. "I remember thinking it sounded like a piglet. I remember teasing her about it." Clara's face lit up. "Yes, yes, you did. You called her Piglet for a week, and she pretended to be offended but secretly loved it. She would scrunch up her nose when she was trying not to laugh," Lysander continued, his voice gaining strength. "She would bite her lip and scrunch her nose, and it never worked. She always ended up laughing anyway." "That is right," another cousin said. "I remember that too." Lysander put down his pen. His hands were shaking. "I can see her face, just for a moment, just a glimpse, but I can see it. She is in the workshop, bent over a piece of leather, and she is scrunching her nose because she is concentrating. And then she looks up and smiles, and I remember that smile. I remember her." Tears were running down his face now, and Greta wrapped her arm around his shoulders, holding him as the memory solidified. Around them, people were crying too, touched by his emotion, by the significance of this moment. "Tell me more," Lysander said, his voice rough with feeling. "Please. Tell me everything." They did. They talked for hours into the early morning, sharing every memory they had. And as they talked, more fragments came back to Lysander. Not everything, not the full year, but pieces. Important pieces. He remembered conversations with his sister, arguments and jokes and quiet moments. He remembered her visiting his workshop, remembered teaching her his craft. He remembered the shape of her smile, the color of her eyes, the way she moved through the world with determined optimism. By the time the gathering ended, exhausted and emotionally wrung out, Lysander had filled an entire notebook with new entries, and he had recovered enough of Lily to feel like he had properly said goodbye. It was not complete. It would never be complete, but it was enough. As people began to leave the next morning, heading back to their various homes, they thanked Greta for organizing the gathering, for bringing them together. They told Lysander they were happy for him, happy he had found someone who cared enough to make this happen. And several of them quietly mentioned to Greta that they were glad Lysander had found her, that he deserved someone good after everything he had been through. When they were finally alone, riding back toward Lysander's workshop, he reached over and took Greta's hand. "You gave me my sister back," he said. "As much as anyone could, you gave me that gift. You gave me myself back," Greta replied. "By remembering me, by showing me I am not forgettable, we are even." "I do not think we will ever be even," Lysander said. "I think I will spend the rest of my life trying to give you as much as you have given me." "Then I suppose we will spend the rest of our lives together," Greta said, her heart racing at the implication. Lysander stopped his horse and turned to look at her fully. "Is that what you want?" "A life together, I think it might be," Greta said carefully. "If you are asking, I am asking. I am asking if you will stay with me, if you will let me remember you every day for the rest of my life, if you will let me prove to you over and over that you are not forgettable, that you are extraordinary, that you are exactly who I want beside me." "I am still afraid," Greta admitted. "I am afraid I will wake up one day and this will all have been a dream, or you will realize I am not worth the effort, or something will happen to break this. Then we will be afraid together," Lysander said, "and we will keep choosing each other anyway." Greta thought about her bees, about the way they committed to their hive, their queen, their collective survival. She thought about trust and risk and the possibility of building something lasting with someone who saw her clearly. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will stay with you." They married in the spring, a simple ceremony at Lysander's workshop with Greta's family and a handful of close friends in attendance. Greta wore a dress she had sewn herself, green like her skin but paler, embroidered with flowers and bees in thread that Lysander had helped her choose. He wore his best clothes, leather vest and clean linen, and when he saw her walking toward him, his face reflected such open joy that several people in the small gathering started crying. The vows they exchanged were traditional in structure but personal in content. Lysander promised to remember her, to see her, to hold her in his mind and heart as the person she was. Greta promised to trust him, to believe in his memory, to build a life with him that was rooted in the present and open to the future. After the ceremony, they celebrated with food and music and dancing, and Greta found herself laughing more than she had in her entire life. Her father pulled her aside at one point, his expression more serious than usual. "I did not understand," he said, "when you talked about being forgettable. I thought it was in your head, something you imagined. But I see now that you found someone who truly sees you, and that has changed you. You are happier, more solid somehow. I am glad you found him." "Thank you," Greta said, hugging her father tightly. "Thank you for saying that." Her brothers danced with her, teased her about being married, and promised to visit often. They liked Lysander, appreciated his straightforward manner and his obvious devotion to their sister, and they had already started making plans to trade goods between their farm and his workshop. When the celebration finally wound down and the guests departed, Greta and Lysander were left alone in the workshop that was now truly theirs, both of them exhausted and happy and ready to begin their life together properly. That first year of marriage taught Greta what it meant to be remembered consistently, day after day, moment after moment. Lysander greeted her each morning as though seeing her was the best part of his day. He asked about her projects, remembered the details of her stories, noticed when she was tired or worried or particularly pleased with herself. He did not need his notebook anymore, at least not for her, though he still kept it and still wrote in it regularly as a precaution against future memory loss. Greta, for her part, learned to relax into being seen. She learned to trust that Lysander's memory of her would not fade, that she did not need to constantly remind him who she was. She began to build friendships in the nearby town, and while most people still struggled to remember her from encounter to encounter, she found it bothered her less. She had Lysander, had his steady presence and attention, and that was enough to anchor her. She also discovered that she loved working with leather. Lysander taught her his craft properly, and she found she had a talent for the detailed tooling work, for creating patterns that told stories. She began making pieces specifically for beekeepers, protective gloves and aprons decorated with bee motifs, and they sold well to the people who came through the area. It gave her a sense of purpose beyond her bee work, a way to contribute to their household income while doing something creative. 2 years into their marriage, Greta realized she was pregnant. She told Lysander one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He went very still, processing the information, and then he stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "We are going to have a child," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a family." "Are you happy?" Greta asked, needing to hear him say it. "I am happier than I knew how to be," Lysander said. "I am terrified and overwhelmed and so incredibly happy." They prepared for the baby together, building a cradle and sewing clothes and talking endlessly about names. Lysander worried about his memory, about whether he would forget important things about their child the way he had forgotten Lily. Greta reassured him that they would face whatever came together, that if he needed to write things down, he could write them down, that their child would be loved and remembered regardless. Their daughter was born in late autumn, during the time of year when Greta had first met Lysander at the fair. She had Lysander's brown hair and Greta's green skin, a beautiful combination that made them both cry when they first saw her. They named her Rose after the flowers that bloomed wild in the valley, and she was perfect. Lysander kept a detailed journal about Rose, writing down every milestone, every funny moment, every important detail. Greta teased him about it sometimes, pointing out that he seemed to remember Rose perfectly well without the journal, but he continued anyway. It soothed something in him, she knew, some lingering fear that he would lose his memories again. And if writing things down helped him feel secure, she would not discourage it. Rose grew into a bright, curious child who loved stories and animals and climbing things she should not climb. She remembered people well, much better than Greta ever had, and it became clear early on that she had inherited her father's memory rather than her mother's forgettability. Greta found this both relieving and slightly bittersweet. She was glad Rose would not struggle the way she had struggled, but there was a small part of her that had hoped they might share that experience, might understand each other in that particular way. Still, watching Rose grow was a joy. She adored both her parents equally, demanding stories from Lysander and wanting to help Greta with the bees. She learned to read young and could often be found curled up with one of Lysander's notebooks, studying the entries about people and places as though they were adventure stories. When Rose was 4, Greta discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy felt easier, more familiar, and their son was born healthy and strong in the summer. They named him Raid after the reeds that grew along the river, and he was as different from Rose as 2 children could be. Where she was energetic and outgoing, he was quiet and thoughtful, content to sit and observe rather than charging into every new experience. Lysander adjusted to having 2 children with the same methodical approach he brought to everything. He kept separate sections in his journal for each child, documenting their personalities and preferences. He made sure to spend individual time with each of them, learning what they liked, what made them laugh, what scared them. He was a devoted father, present and attentive, and Greta loved watching him with their children. For her part, Greta found that motherhood brought her a sense of belonging she had not anticipated. Her children remembered her, of course, the way children always remember their mothers. But more than that, they needed her in a way no one else ever had. They looked for her when they were hurt or scared or happy. They sought her approval, her comfort, her presence. It was grounding in a way she had not known she needed. As the children grew, they sometimes asked why other people seemed to forget their mother. Why the baker in town would greet Greta as a stranger even though she had bought bread there for years. Why the neighbors seemed surprised to see her every time she visited. Lysander and Greta explained as best they could, framing it as something unique about Greta, something that made her special rather than deficient. "Your mother is not easy to remember for most people," Lysander told them. "But that means the people who do remember her are special too." "It means they really see her." "I see her," Rose declared. "I see her every day." "I know you do, little flower, and that makes you special indeed." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The workshop prospered, Greta's bee business expanded, and their family grew in love and stability. Lysander still kept his notebooks, still wrote down important things, but his fear of forgetting had lessened over the years. He had learned to trust his own mind more, had learned that not every memory needed to be preserved in ink to be real. Greta, meanwhile, had learned to trust that she was memorable to the people who mattered. She no longer worried constantly about being forgotten by Lysander or her children. She had stopped testing whether people remembered her, had stopped introducing herself multiple times in every conversation. She accepted her forgettability as a quirk rather than a tragedy, and she focused her energy on the life she had built rather than the life she might have had. When Rose turned 10, she came to her parents with a question that surprised them both. "I want to visit the trading fair," she said. "The one where you met. I want to see where our story started." Lysander and Greta exchanged glances. They had not been back to the fair since that first autumn, had not felt the need to return to the place where their relationship began. But the idea of taking their children there, of showing them that specific meadow and explaining how their father had remembered their mother when no one else did, that had a certain appeal. "We could go," Greta said slowly. "The autumn fair is in 2 months. We could make it a family trip." "I want to see the hilltop," Rose added. "Where you told Mother you loved her. That is my favorite part of the story." "How do you know about the hilltop?" Lysander asked, though he was smiling. "I read about it in your journal. You describe it very beautifully." "You have been reading my old journals, all of them," Rose admitted. "I like knowing the history. I like seeing how you wrote about Mother when you first met her." Lysander laughed. "Well then, I suppose we should go to the fair and show you where it all happened." They made the trip that autumn, all 4 of them traveling together. Reed was nervous about the journey, his first time away from home for more than a day, but Rose was excited enough for both of them. They arrived at the fairgrounds on the first day, and Greta felt a wave of nostalgia seeing the meadow again, seeing the merchants setting up their stalls in the same patterns they had followed for decades. Lysander's old booth location had been taken by a potter, but they found a nearby spot and spent time watching the fair come to life. Rose wanted to hear every detail of that first meeting, wanted to know exactly where Greta had been standing, what Lysander had been wearing, what the weather had been like. Lysander and Greta indulged her, retelling the story they had told many times before, but with new details prompted by being in the actual location. That evening, they walked as a family up the path to the hilltop where Lysander had confessed his feelings. The view was just as beautiful as Greta remembered, the valley spread below them lit by the setting sun, the mountains purple in the distance. "This is where I told your mother I had been falling in love with her," Lysander said to the children. "This is where I admitted I had been thinking about her for a year, writing about her, wanting to see her again. And this is where I decided to believe him," Greta added, "where I decided to trust that maybe I was not as forgettable as I thought." Rose looked at her parents with shining eyes. "That is so romantic." Reed, more practical, asked, "Were you scared, terrified?" Greta said honestly. "I was afraid I would believe him and then he would forget me. I was afraid I would get hurt." "But you believed him anyway," Reed said. "I did. Because sometimes being brave means doing something even when you are afraid. And I am very glad I did, because otherwise I would not have your father, and I would not have either of you." They stood on the hilltop as darkness fell, the 4 of them together, and Greta felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. This was her family. These were the people who remembered her, who saw her, who loved her, and that was enough. That was everything. As the years continued to pass, Greta and Lysander grew older together. their children eventually growing up and starting to make their own ways in the world. Rose apprenticed with a merchant, learning trade routes and negotiation, her excellent memory serving her well. Raid, quieter and more contemplative, became interested in healing work and began studying with a local herbalist. Through it all, Lysander kept his journals and Greta kept hers. They documented their lives in parallel, his entries detailed and careful, hers more impressionistic and emotional. Sometimes they read passages aloud to each other, sharing their perspectives on shared experiences, laughing at the differences in how they remembered the same events. "You wrote that I was grumpy that morning," Lysander said once, reading from Greta's journal. "I was not grumpy. I was thoughtful." "You were grumpy because you lost your favorite all and could not find it," Greta corrected. "Thoughtful is a generous interpretation. I was frustrated, perhaps, but not grumpy. We will agree to disagree." These small disagreements about memory and perception became a running joke between them, a gentle way of acknowledging that everyone experienced the world differently, that memory was subjective and imperfect even when you wrote it all down. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Lysander gave Greta a gift that made her cry. It was a compiled journal, beautifully bound, containing every entry he had ever written about her. It started with that first observation from the first fair, the one where he had noted her copper buttons and her smile, and it continued through 15 years of marriage, thousands of small observations and moments preserved in ink. "I want you to have this," he said. "I want you to see yourself the way I see you, to understand that you have never been forgettable to me, not for a single day." Greta paged through the journal, reading entries about their courtship, their wedding, the births of their children, ordinary days and extraordinary ones. She saw herself through his eyes, saw the person he had fallen in love with and continued loving, saw all the details he had noticed and preserved. "This is the most precious thing anyone has ever given me," she said. "Thank you." "You are the most precious thing anyone has ever given me," Lysander replied. "Thank you for believing in us, for taking that risk, for staying." As they moved into the later years of their life together, Greta noticed that her forgettability seemed to be easing slightly. It had never been absolute with everyone, she knew. Certain people had always been able to remember her better than others. But now, more people in their town recognized her, greeted her by name, remembered previous conversations. She mentioned this to Lysander, who had a theory. "You are more grounded now," he said. "You have a family, a home, a place in the community. You are not the uncertain young woman who believed she was forgettable. You are Greta Lyle, and people know who that is, even if they struggle with the details sometimes." "Maybe," Greta said. "Or maybe I just care less about being forgotten by strangers now that I am remembered by the people who matter." "That too," Lysander agreed. Their children married and had children of their own, giving Greta and Lysander grandchildren who were loud and messy and brought new joy into their lives. Rose had 3 children, all of them outgoing and adventurous like their mother. Reed had 1 daughter, quiet and thoughtful, who loved books and flowers and spent hours helping Greta with the bees. Watching his grandchildren grow, Lysander remarked once that he had more memories now than he could possibly write down, that his journals were full and his mind was fuller, and that he was grateful for every single one. "Even the difficult memories?" Greta asked. They had weathered hard times too over the years, losses and disappointments and struggles. Those were in the journals as well, preserved alongside the happy moments. "Even those," Lysander said, "because they are part of the whole. They are part of what we built together." On a warm summer evening, when they were both well into their 60s, Greta and Lysander sat on the porch of their workshop watching the sun set over the valley. They held hands the way they had on that hilltop so many years ago, and they were quiet together, comfortable in their silence. "Do you ever regret anything?" Reed had asked them once when he was younger, seeking advice about his own life choices. They had told him no, that regret was wasted energy, that every choice they had made had led them to where they were, and they were content with that destination. Sitting on the porch now, Greta thought about that conversation and about the long path that had brought her here. From being a forgettable young woman who believed she would always be alone, to being a wife and mother and grandmother who was deeply embedded in a web of love and memory. It had required courage to trust Lysander that first time, to believe she might be worth remembering, but she had found that courage and it had changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Lysander asked, squeezing her hand gently. "About how grateful I am," Greta said. "For you. For our life. For everything we built." "I am grateful too," Lysander said. "You are still the person I never need to write down, the person I will never forget." "And you are the person who taught me I am worth remembering," Greta replied. They sat together as the stars began to emerge, two people who had found each other against unlikely odds, who had built something lasting from a chance meeting and a notebook full of careful observations. The workshop behind them held years of work and memories. The valley before them held their family and community. And between them, clasped in their joined hands, was the simple truth that love built on attention and memory and steady choice was love that endured. Rose visited the next morning with her youngest child, a boy of 6 who immediately ran to the beehives to watch the insects work. Greta followed him, explaining how the hive operated, how each bee had a role, how they communicated through dance and scent. The boy listened with the intense focus children bring to subjects that fascinate them, and Greta saw herself in his curiosity, his desire to understand the small creatures that most people overlooked. "Grandmother," the boy said, "do the bees remember you?" "I think they might," Greta said. "Or at least they remember I am safe, that I bring them no harm. That is its own kind of memory." "Grandfather says you used to think people would forget you," the boy continued with the blunt honesty of the young. "But I remember you. I always remember you." "I know you do, sweet one. And I am glad." Later, when Rose was leaving, she hugged Greta tightly and said, "You know, I have been thinking about your forgettability, about how it shaped you. And I think it made you exactly who you needed to be for Father. Someone who understood what it meant to lose memory, to fear losing connection. You helped him heal because you understood that specific wound." "Perhaps," Greta said, "or perhaps we simply found each other at the right time when we were both ready to be found." "Maybe it is both," Rose said. That night, Greta wrote in her journal about the visit, about her grandson's question and her daughter's observation. She wrote about feeling complete, about having lived a full life with someone who saw her clearly. She wrote about the beauty of being known, of being held in someone's memory, not because you had to fight for it, but because you belonged there naturally. Lysander read over her shoulder, something she allowed because they had no secrets between them after all these years. "That is lovely," he said. "You write beautifully when you let yourself." "I learned from the best," Greta said. "You showed me the power of writing things down, of preserving what matters." "We taught each other a lot of things," Lysander said. "We did." The seasons turned. Autumn came again, bringing with it the anniversary of their meeting at the fair. They no longer traveled to the fair itself, too settled in their home and too content with their routines to make the journey. But they marked the date each year, telling their story again, remembering how it had all begun. 23 years since I first saw you at that fair," Lysander said. 23 years since I wrote down your name and decided you were worth remembering. 23 years since you proved I was not as forgettable as I believed, Greta replied. You were never forgettable, Lysander said. You just needed someone to pay attention, and you needed someone who understood the importance of memory. We were perfect for each other. We still are. They made love that night with the gentle familiarity of long partnership, bodies knowing bodies, hearts knowing hearts. Afterward, lying together in the darkness, Greta thought about all the nights they had shared, all the moments of connection that had built their life together. She thought about the young orc woman who had stood at the trading fair believing she was destined for solitude. And she wished she could tell that woman what was coming, what joy waited on the other side of fear. But perhaps it was better that young Greta had not known. Perhaps the surprise of being seen, the shock of being remembered, had been necessary for her to truly understand what Lysander was offering. Perhaps the journey from believing herself forgettable to knowing herself memorable had required that leap of faith, that moment of choosing to trust, despite all her experience telling her not to. Winter settled over the valley, and with it came the quiet months when travel was difficult and the workshop saw fewer customers. Greta and Lysander used this time to work on personal projects, to read together by the fire, to plan for the spring. Reed visited often with his daughter, and they spent long evenings talking about healing plants and the ways different herbs could be combined for various effects. Rose wrote letters from the road, her merchant travels taking her far but her correspondence keeping her close in spirit. One particularly cold evening, a knock came at the door. Lysander opened it to find a young orc woman standing in the snow, her green skin dark in the twilight, her expression uncertain. "I am sorry to bother you," she said. "I am looking for Greta Othwin. I was told she lived here." Greta came to the door, curious. "I am Greta Lyle now, but yes, I was Greta Othwin. Can I help you?" "My name is Petra Oakes," the young woman said. "I came because I heard stories about you, about how you used to be forgettable and then you were not. About how you found someone who remembered you, and I was hoping you might tell me how you did it, because I am the same way. People forget me the moment I leave their sight, and I do not know how to live with it anymore." Greta felt her heart clench. She saw herself in this young woman, saw the pain and frustration and loneliness that came from being perpetually overlooked. She opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. "Come in and get warm, and I will tell you everything." Petra came inside gratefully, and Greta made tea while Lysander built up the fire. The young woman sat at their table, and Greta saw how she held herself, how she seemed to expect to disappear at any moment. "I know what you are going through," Greta said gently. "I lived with it my whole life until I met Lysander, and I can tell you that it does get better, or at least it can if you find the right people." "But how do you find them?" Petra asked. "How do you know who will remember you?" "You cannot know for certain," Greta admitted. "But you can look for people who pay attention, who notice details, who care about others. And you can learn to value yourself even when others forget you. That was the hardest part for me, believing I had worth even when no one seemed to see it." They talked for hours, Greta sharing her story and Lysander adding his perspective. They told Petra about the trading fair, about the notebook, about the slow building of trust. They told her about the gathering that had helped Lysander remember his sister, about how helping him had helped Greta see herself differently. They told her about building a family, about raising children who remembered her, about creating a life that was rich and full despite the forgettability. "So there is hope," Petra said finally, her voice small. "There is always hope," Greta said firmly. "You are not doomed to loneliness just because people forget you easily. You simply need to find the people who do not forget, or the people who write things down, or the people who care enough to keep trying. They exist. I promise you they exist." And in the meantime, Lysander added, write about yourself. Keep your own record. Be the person who remembers yourself, even if no one else does. That matters too. Petra stayed with them for 3 days, snowed in by a winter storm. During that time, Greta taught her about bees and memory, about resilience and self-worth. Lysander gave her a small notebook and showed her how he kept his entries organized. They treated her like she mattered, like her presence was important, and Greta could see how it affected the young woman, how she began to hold herself differently, speak more confidently. When Petra finally left, heading back to her own home with promises to write, Greta felt a sense of completion. She had been given a gift by Lysander all those years ago, the gift of being seen and remembered. And now she had passed that gift forward, had shown another forgettable person that there was hope, that life could be different. That was good, Lysander said after Petra had gone. Helping her. I think it mattered. It did, Greta agreed. It reminded me how far I have come. How much I have changed. You have not changed, Lysander corrected gently. You have simply become more yourself, more confident in who you are. The core of you was always there, I just helped you see it. We helped each other, Greta said. That is what partnership means. Spring came, bringing warmth and new growth. The bees emerged from their winter dormancy, eager to work. Greta tended them with the same care she had always given them and found joy in their reliable presence. Lysander began a new project, an elaborate leather piece that would take months to complete, and he worked on it with the focused attention he brought to everything he cared about. Letters arrived from Petra, sent through the merchant routes. She was doing better, she wrote. She had found work at a bakery where the owner kept careful notes about everything, including her employees. She had started writing in her journal daily, documenting her life the way Lysander had taught her. She was learning to live with her forgettability rather than fighting it constantly, and the peace that brought was profound. Greta added Petra's letters to her collection of important correspondence, saving them alongside letters from her children and grandchildren. Each letter was proof that she had made a difference, that her life had meaning beyond herself and her immediate family. As summer peaked and then began its slow decline toward autumn, Greta found herself thinking often about memory and permanence. She thought about the bees, living their short lives with purpose. She thought about Lysander's notebooks, attempting to capture time and hold it still. She thought about her children and grandchildren, carrying forward pieces of her in their faces and habits and values. We leave traces, she said to Lysander one evening. Even those of us who are forgettable, we leave traces in the people we touch, the things we make, the lives we live. You leave more than traces, Lysander said. You leave a legacy. Our children, our grandchildren, the people you have helped like Petra, that is not a trace, that is an impact. I used to think I would leave nothing behind, Greta said. I used to think being forgettable meant being unimportant, but it does not, does it? It never did. You were always important. People just failed to notice. But you noticed. I did. Best decision I ever made, deciding to remember you. They were in their 70s now, both of them slowing down but still active, still engaged with life and each other. Their grandchildren were growing, some approaching adulthood themselves. The workshop continued to produce fine leather goods, though Lysander had trained an apprentice to take over much of the daily work. Greta's bees thrived under Reed's daughter's care, the girl having developed her grandmother's talent with the insects. Everything was changing and staying the same at once, the way life did when you had built something stable and lasting. Greta felt content in a deep, bone-level way. She had lived a full life, had experienced more love and connection than she had ever dreamed possible. The forgettability that had defined her youth felt distant now, a problem that had been solved through patience and the right partnership. One autumn morning, as Greta was checking on the beehives, she felt a sudden sharp pain in her chest. It passed quickly, but it left her shaken. She said nothing to Lysander at first, not wanting to worry him, but the pains returned over the following days, unpredictable and concerning. Finally, she told him, and he insisted she see a healer. The diagnosis was what they had both feared. Her heart was weakening, worn out from 7 decades of work. There were herbs that might help, rest that might extend things, but the underlying truth was clear. Her time was limited. Greta took the news with more calm than Lysander did. She had lived well, had experienced everything she wanted to experience. She was not afraid of death itself, though she hated the thought of leaving Lysander behind. "I am not ready to lose you," Lysander said that night, holding her close. "I will never be ready." "I know," Greta said softly, "but we do not get to choose these things. We only get to choose how we face them." "I do not want to forget you," he said, and she heard the old fear in his voice, the terror that had driven him to start writing everything down decades ago. "I cannot forget you. You will not forget me," Greta promised. "I am too deeply written into your memory, into your heart. I am part of you now. Even if you wanted to forget, you could not. You are certain, I am certain. You have remembered me every single day for more than 20 years, Lysander. That is not going to change. I am unforgettable to you, just as you are unforgettable to me." They spent her remaining months making the most of every day. They took walks when she felt strong enough, sat in companionable silence when she needed rest. They talked about their life together, about the memories they treasured, about how grateful they were to have found each other. They gathered their children and grandchildren, spending time as a family, making sure everyone knew they were loved. Lysander wrote constantly, documenting these final months in detail. Greta did not discourage him, understanding that it was his way of processing, his way of holding on to her. She contributed to the journal sometimes, adding her own perspective, wanting to leave her voice behind for him to find later. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Lysander asked her if she was afraid. "No," Greta said honestly. "I am sad to leave you and the children. But I am not afraid. I have lived a good life, a full life. I have been loved and I have loved in return. That is enough. It does not feel like enough to me." "It never feels like enough when you are the one being left behind," Greta said gently, "but you will be all right. You have our children, our grandchildren. You have your work and your memories. You have a life full of meaning and connection. You will grieve, and that is good and right. But you will also continue, and you will find joy again. I do not want to find joy without you. You will anyway. Because that is who you are. You are someone who pays attention, who notices beauty, who creates connection. You cannot help but find joy. It is your nature." When the end came, it was quiet and peaceful. Greta slipped away in her sleep, her hand in Lysander's, surrounded by family. Her last conscious thought was of gratitude, of how impossibly lucky she had been to be seen, to be remembered, to be loved so completely. Lysander grieved deeply, as she had known he would. But he also continued, as she had promised he would. He finished the elaborate leather piece he had been working on and donated it to the local temple in her memory. He tended her bees, keeping them alive and productive in her honor. He spent time with his children and grandchildren, sharing stories about Greta, making sure they understood who she had been and what she had meant. And he read his journals, all of them, starting from that first entry at the trading fair. He reread every observation, every memory, every moment he had documented of their life together. He found comfort in the words, in the proof that she had existed, that she had been real and important and deeply loved. 6 months after Greta's death, a letter arrived from Petra. She had heard the news and wanted to express her condolences. But more than that, she wanted Lysander to know that Greta had changed her life, that the 3 days she had spent with them had given her hope and direction, that she was doing well now and would always be grateful. Lysander wrote back, thanking her for the letter and telling her that Greta would have been pleased to know she had made such a difference. He encouraged Petra to keep writing, to keep building a life that had meaning despite her forgettability. And he told her that love was possible, that connection was possible, that being forgettable did not mean being unworthy of devotion. As time passed, Lysander's grief softened into something more bearable. He still missed Greta every day, still wished he could share moments with her. But he also found that she was right, that he did continue to find joy. He found it in his grandchildren's laughter, in the satisfaction of creating beautiful leather work, in the memories he had preserved so carefully. One day, several years after Greta's death, Rose came to visit and found him reading through his journals again. "You still read those?" she asked gently. "Sometimes," Lysander said, "when I want to feel close to her. You still remember her without them. Every single day, every moment. I remember her laugh, her kindness, the way she looked at bees like they were the most fascinating creatures in the world. I remember how she felt in my arms, how she tasted like honey and smelled like lavender. I remember everything." "Then the journals worked," Rose said. "They kept you from forgetting what mattered most." "No," Lysander corrected gently. "Your mother kept me from forgetting. The journals were just insurance, but she was right. She was unforgettable to me. She always will be." He lived for another decade, passing his workshop to Rose's eldest son and spending his final years surrounded by family. When his time came, he went peacefully, the same way Greta had. And his last thought was of her, of the orc woman who had believed she was forgettable but who had become the center of his entire world, the memory he trusted most, the love that had defined and enriched his life. Their children and grandchildren preserved their journals, keeping them as family treasures. The story of the forgettable orc woman and the man who remembered everything about her became a family legend, told to each new generation as an example of what love could be when it was built on attention and care and steady choice. And in a quiet valley where the bees still worked and the leather goods workshop still stood, the traces of Greta and Lysander's life together remained, permanent and precious, a testament to the fact that being remembered by the right person was everything, and that even the most forgettable soul could leave an unforgettable mark on the world.